Welcome to the Farm Crisis panel. I have a few things to say, but I'd like to bring my panelists out first. Aaron Lehman, I'll let you all introduce yourselves. I'll just give you your name and just the basics. Aaron Lehman is the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. Correct, okay. Barb Kalbach is a farmer I've known for many years in Adair County, I believe. Yes. And very outspoken. She knows what she's talking about. And Chris Petersen, as you just met just a little while ago, a pig farmer who I admire greatly. As I was sitting here listening, and I have to say, we had a dairy farmer, the National Farmers Union Vice President Patti Elderberg was supposed to be on here. She needed to leave sooner. It would be nice to have a dairy farmer on the panel because there's so many issues with dairy. I wanted to start out to say this is a wonderful event. I thank everyone who organized this and helped fund this. I think next time what I'd really like to see is all of the presidential candidates here and any other politicians who'd be interested, and have them be in the audience and have them listen to the farmers. Too much of the time, that's a good idea. Too much of the time, I'm afraid they don't listen. Great. Who's that? That's true. But if you'd like to come up, I didn't want to, he's been up since very early this morning. We can have another dairy farmer up, yes. Great, thank you. I forgot, we have a volunteer. Francis Thicke, as you all know.
You.
It's been a long day, I think. So I have to mention, my husband is George Naylor, so of course I have a 10-page speech to read, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'd like to direct you to our website, which is clarityonparity.com, and I will make this brief. I'm not going to read this whole thing. First of all, I just want to say, we're going to come full circle now and pull together today's discussions with a distinguished panel of farmers here as we delve further into the farm crisis that has been steadily putting stress, sometimes unbearable stress, on farmers, rural communities, and the land that they work. All of you have been working hard to build power through our grassroots movements that shake up and wake up those we need to bring along on the ride. We will start by showing why the farm crisis is everyone's crisis and what we need to do next. And I want to emphasize the urgency of acting now. But we also must recognize that we live in an era of multiple crises, and we can't solve one crisis without solving, or at least seriously addressing, the other crises. And of course, climate change is looming large, already affecting how we farm and produce food. But other crises, if not addressed, are just as serious. These crises are insect population collapse, including pollinators, which we depend on for our food, species extinction, chemical pollution, including poisonous agricultural chemicals, rural poverty, and increasing world hunger. And conflict and climate-induced migration, insecurity, and instability. I would also add incredible inequalities and injustices. And we are facing a crisis, I'd say, that also has to do with how we think about these issues. Or for too many of us, we take it the easy route and let others think for us. In fact, what scares me most today about climate change is the solutions we humans come up with that we think will make a difference, but really don't change much of anything and are more profit-driven than anything else. The solutions will lull us into a kind of thoughtless complacency so we can go on living our technology-enhanced lives away from the nastiness of weather and nature and inconveniences. Solutions like climate-smart agriculture that relies on technologies and digital knowledge instead of relying on ancestral and indigenous knowledge, and community-based agroecology that puts the farmers and their understanding of the landscape in which they work first. Also, another false solution is carbon markets that financializes the soil itself, creating an opportunity for investors to profit and corporations to buy credits with avoiding the reduction of their own harms to the environment. And this is a global issue, one in which the United States uses its power to coerce other countries to accept our corporate-dominated, destructive system of agriculture. For farmers around the world, especially in the global south, it is seeds, not soil, that is at the heart of the struggle of farmers' rights and for food sovereignty. It is the ownership of seeds, especially the genetically engineered seeds, and the chemicals that accompany those seeds that are taking away farmer rights. Furthermore, land grabbing and the financialization of land, including the use of land to sequester carbon and putting that dollar amount on carbon through those carbon markets, is putting even more farmers at risk of being pushed off the land and communities losing their ability to feed themselves. Thus, we have a crisis of political and social engagement. So you see, to address the farm crisis, the conversation cannot stop at the soil or even at incentivizing individual farmers to change to regenerative practices. It is so much more. So I'm going to go back to the urgency of this issue. And I'd like to mention why I am here today is because I see so many farmers, including vegetable farmers who try to sell at the farmers markets, need to go out of business because they can't make it. And even the larger farmers who do the corn, soybeans are going out of, I can't make it, they're struggling. I have a friend of mine whose family has been farming in our area for generations, and she said that the friends that she knows, the wives of farmers, those wives are worried that their farmers will commit suicide. That's the way out. I even have a friend of mine, a close personal friend, who has attempted suicide twice because of the farming situation in large part. So for me, that is the crisis, that we're losing farmers, we have so much stress on them. So my first question then to the panel, and I want them to talk as much as they can. First of all, I'll let you go down the line, introduce yourself again as much as you want to say. I'd like you to tell us what the farm crisis looks like in your community, and describe that so that we can all understand what that means and why we should care.
Francis, do you want to start first, or do you want me to start? Okay, my name is Aaron Lehman, and I'm a fifth-generation farmer in northern Polk County. I grow corn, soybeans, oats, and hay with my family. And I'm the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. And it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for moderating, and thank you so much for organizing this event, and thank you for being here. What does the farm crisis look in our area? Our farmers are tightening their belts in every way they can. Not to state the obvious too many times, but they're meeting with landlords, they're meeting with bankers, they're meeting with lenders, they're meeting input suppliers. They're doing everything just to make ends meet. And that narrows the focus, right, to can we get through this coming year or the next couple years. And the consequences of that is that investments are not being made that should be made on the farm. Capital investments, machinery is not being purchased that should be replacing old machinery. Farmers are less likely to try something new or different or innovative when they don't know if they're going to be there more than the next year or not. The next generation, if there is a next generation in the picture on the farm, those decisions are being put off. And we know how important that is in Iowa with the aging farm population. Those are all impacts that I see on the farm, and yet those go much further than that. The stress levels of the farmers in our areas is really, really high, and those stress levels, as we talked about earlier today, impact everybody in the community. And I'm going to stop there because I know where our discussion will continue. Go ahead.
I'm Barb Kalbach from Adair County, the #1 county in Iowa. And in spite of that, we're fading just like the rest of rural Iowa is. I'm a fourth-generation family farmer. I worked as a registered nurse for many, many years in cardiac rehab. And what I see, I'm a member of Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement, and I started this fight, this battle to save the family farm back in 1981, 1982. And my family was Republican, but what was happening under Ronald Reagan. My dad, of course, still farmed. He was struggling. He had farms to pay for, and he had machinery to pay for, and I was going to rallies and trying to get politically engaged and get the politicians engaged and make them realize what was happening to rural Iowa. And my dad said to me, he said, "Barb, it isn't going to do you any good." And I said, "But Dad, you have to try, because what's your choice? If we follow that path, you know what the answer is going to be." And so I've been in this fight for many years. And then in 2002, a man came to put 7,200 sows and gilts in 7 buildings right by my house, 1,995 feet from the corner of our house. And I got then engaged in the factory farm situation. And once again, we were able to stop that man, but I felt we were fortunate, and I wanted to help the next person that he decided to build his building by. And that's why I've been involved in Iowa CCI for so many years, to try to get the moratorium passed, to try to clean up our waters. And that's why each and every one of us here today needs to be engaged in some way to solve these problems. And the thing that I've talked about a lot lately in the last 2 years as the political season heats up is we need to have a long-term vision, a long vision about how to repopulate rural America. Because what it's come down to is everyone's moving to town. And do we really want the bigger part of our population here in the United States living in the 5 major cities? Or in Iowa, everyone live in Des Moines or the Quad Cities. Is that what we want? Because if that is what we want, we are accomplishing it very nicely. So if we feel like we'd like to have new farmers out in our communities and to rebuild small town America, we need to get some policy going, like the second new Homestead Act, which I've talked to politicians about, a second new Homestead Act to entice people back out of the cities. And I'm sure there's people who would like to go if they felt they could make a living to small town Iowa or small town America. And then I was called by a reporter from out east, and she wanted to talk to somebody, a young farmer, about the debt crisis or the farm crisis, but debt's a lot of that. And I said, well, you know, my husband and I right now, we paid off our 1986 farm crisis debt in 2006. Got that all paid off. So we're past that. But I knew a young guy, and so I called him up. He's around 38. And I said, would he be interested in talking to her? And he said, yeah, he would. But in our conversation, he also said, you know, we farm 6,000 acres, my brother and I do. And he said, right now, I see my kids on the weekends. And he said, you could tell he was discouraged and he's tired. And that's 6,000 acres. So if you can't make it comfortably on 6,000 acres, that's something to worry about.
Yeah, Chris Petersen, Clear Lake, Iowa. Grew up on a farm, been an independent farmer all my life, and the stress. In the early 60s, there was a suicide in the immediate family, so, you know, I know all about that stuff. And it's kind of like what's going on today. It's kind of like the book Silent Spring. You drive around the neighborhood, you hear what's going on in the neighborhood, and oh yeah, that guy retired, and that farm's being sold to somebody or being rented to somebody that's farming 5, 6, 7, 10,000 acres. We got one guy farming 15,000 acres. And, well, we got to get the young kid farming, you know, the big farm family. So, okay, Farm Credit's going to give them the loan, hands down, put up a bunch of confinements, and the independent, mid-sized, small-scale family farmer who wants to raise pigs, there's no market, so you basically get laughed out of the bank if you even go in there and talk to them about it. And if you try and do it the right way, you got to do it niche-wise, because, you know, the profit is on pigs, there's no market anymore for anything, so you got to find a way to make money. And you got to find a job in town. You know, yep, we get the subsidies, we just go get another job in town. And that's the stress level of being a family farmer today, and no wonder the suicides are rampant. The divorces, everything else going on out there. You know, when we went through the 8-cent hogs and the downturn, forced through a bankruptcy and started over, I tell you what, you go through it, it's nothing imaginable. I mean, it's just, your whole life is in turmoil. Your whole life is upside down. And at the forefront of that, you better have a damn good, loving wife and a supportive family. Otherwise, the suicide things come into the picture. They do even otherwise sometimes. You just can't imagine the stress. And it's out there. You feel it. I feel it now again with everything going on. If things don't turn around the prices, and if these politics don't straighten out, and we don't get somebody in there that's going to address these issues, not put Band-Aids on them, but really start to address these issues, it's going to continue.
I'm Francis Thicke. My wife Susan, who's here, and I have a grass-based dairy farm. We're actually independent of the dairy crisis in the sense that we process our milk on the farm, we produce bottled milk and yogurt and cheese, and we market it locally. However, I'm pretty familiar with what's going on in the dairy industry. You've heard about it. We heard about it today from the National Vice President of Farmers Union. And the interesting thing is that there, as she said, we have the same number of cows, but we have the family farms dropping out and the confinements growing. And you might wonder, why is that happening? Well, it's really because the family farms can't weather that crisis. They run out of capital. The confinements will have probably a lot of capital behind them. They can weather that. And then when the prices go up later, they can make it back. But the family farmers can't make it through that, a lot of them. So we're losing a lot of them. And it's really a tragic situation. And I'm happy to hear that the Farmers Union is looking at some kind of supply management. Unfortunately, it's a little late because now we have so many CAFOs. In Canada, they were able to maintain their family farms, dairy farms, because they had a quota system in place early. Now, how's it going to work? I'm not sure. If we have a quota system and we have the big CAFOs, how are we going to make that work out? I just don't know. It's a problem.
Thank you. Wonderful. So we're talking about all the things that have happened to our rural communities, to our farmers. I'd like to look at, again, my husband's George Naylor, and so I'm looking at how things happened in the past. Sometimes I should say, I've often been accused of being just nostalgic. When I say I think we need to get animals back on the land, people think I want to go back in time to what it was like in the 1950s or something. But what I'd like to do now is try to envision what would it be like today if we had parity prices, if we'd had all kinds of other kinds of supply management. What would our farms and our communities look like today if we hadn't had the kind of things that have happened in the past 50, 60 years? And then we'll go look to see what I'd like to do is try to get a vision of what it would like today what it would look like today on our farms and our communities if we had the policies in place that supported farmers.
By the way, we saved you a seat on the couch here if you'd like to join us. So
I kind of like to stand.
that's fine. I've been asked a number of times, how is the farm crisis today different than it was when the debt crisis of the 80s, and I was a high school kid, so I can't speak from financial experience, but I lived it with my family. And I think the answer I gave is it gives me some clues into the answer I should give for your question. Structurally, agriculture is quite different, right? And I think that in two different ways. Farm ownership in Iowa is very different than it was in the 80s. There's a lot of land that is owned by people who are off the farm, a lot of land owned by people who are out of state, a lot of land owned by trusts, partnerships. It's a lot more complicated ownership issue for the farms now. And so it's very complicated in that way. And the other thing is that the level of concentration in agribusiness since the 80s we saw the charts up there, has almost doubled in every one of those segments that we talked about. Those are tremendous challenges to get through. And I think that if we would have had systems of parity, that we would have seen those things, that we would have seen farm ownership on the farm and much more control by farmers. Capital would be much more controlled by farmers. And I think agribusiness consolidation would not have gotten to the extreme levels where they are now. Levels to that, what I'm afraid of is that we are going to see a financial crisis in agribusiness similar to what we saw in financial institutions about a decade ago, where we're eventually going to say, this agribusiness is so big that we're not going to even allow it to fail because of faulty business practices. And eventually our society is going to be asked to bail out agribusinesses like we were asked to bail out financial institutions. And we know that has ramifications for all of us in agriculture. So those two things, I think, we would have seen better. We would have seen much more diverse ownership of farms and participation in farms, and I think agribusiness consolidation would be much less than what it is now.
Often people will ask me, why is farming today different? What makes it different? And a lot of times I draw a picture of a square mile, and in the 1970s, 72, there were, on our square mile, there were 6 families, and they all farmed. Now there's one family that farms, and his sister lives down the road, and he is 72 years old. In our whole little rural community that we live in right now, there is one other farmer who is younger, actively farming, and he is in his 50s. So there's 2. The rest of the farmsteads are pretty well empty except for one young man who moved in down the road from us, and he's like about 40, I think, but he comes from a family that owns now at least 20,000 acres across our county and into other counties. So they just get bigger and bigger. There was a couple of farms that just came up for sale, and their modus operandi is to hear about maybe this farm's coming up for sale, go to the owner and make them an offer before it ever technically goes on the market. And usually they get that farm. So they're just growing. And the rest of us were down to one 72-year-old, So when I draw that picture for people of the 6 families, I say to them, now look at this. All of them farmed. All of them needed a veterinarian. They needed a seed salesman, a feed salesman. They needed to buy equipment for their hogs. They needed hog water, cattle water. They needed feed bunks. All of that was supplied in your little town right down the road. So think of the jobs. Think of the tax revenue that was created by that kind of community all across the state. Now, there's nobody. I think Vince, the 50-year-old, he raises some cattle, so there's that. But none of those businesses now exist in the small towns surrounding our farm. So the other thing I'd like to say and point out to people is that when these CAFOs are built in these counties, when I talk about tax revenue being generated by all the small farms that used to be out in the countryside, those CAFOs generate no new revenue for the counties. None, zip, zero. There is no new tax revenue. Most of their inputs they get from one or two certain people that they do business with. They have their own veterinarian, they have their own this and that, but it all comes from away somewhere. So what they've done, what that kind of business model has done is it's drained the counties, drained the communities, taken away, the money goes out. One thing my husband said back in the 80s, I said, in the farm crisis, I said, "Why is this happening, Jim?" And he says, "Barb, it's a pie. And they're pulling all the wealth out of that pie." And I've never forgotten that. That's another picture. So.
Yeah, thank you, Barb. Actually, a couple of things. I believe about 50 years ago, whatever, the very powerful and the very wealthy people in control of this country sat down and decided, how can we add to our pile of money? They stuck their finger right in the middle of the Midwest and farm country, and they said, you know what, we're going to take over agriculture. They've been very successful at it. Not only the towns and the counties, but on a national level. It's a gold mine out here. Absolute gold mine. And it supported our small towns and our young families farming. And on a personal level, we were just sitting the other day talking about it. At the kitchen table, our daughter was over. And some of these issues came up, and I said, Becky, you're at the age right now where if we had, I didn't say the word parity, but family farms had a fair chance, get a fair price, the ownership component of land, the size of the farms, the antitrust, the competition stuff. Right now, at my age, I would be talking about and asking you to take over the land we had bought as a young family to start farming and added to it. It would be the continuation of the family farm. And that's basically all gone now, except for very few instances. Average age of the farmer and these kids, my God, trying to get into farming and going and borrowing the money and then trying to make a living out of it besides, it's virtually impossible. Virtually impossible. And, you know, I believe that's not happened by chance. That's happened by what's been going on, the total takeover. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I grew up in southeastern Minnesota on a dairy farm, and there were little farms, dairy farms, all up and down the ridge. We lived on the blufflands above the Mississippi. And we were the first pickup on the bus in the 50s and 60s. And every stop, every half mile or mile, there was another farm. And now I'm thinking across that whole ridge, my brother still farms the home farm, and I think that's the only real full-time farm there. So it's amazing. That's what it would be like, I guess. But there is a little glimmer of hope, I think, in the dairy grazing industry. I just came from a dairy grazing work conference in Wisconsin yesterday and the day before. And there's a lot of excitement. The young farmers starting out, and they have a mentor program. They have experienced grazing dairy farmers and beef farmers. They're master farmers, and then they have the young farmers learning from them. And they kind of take over. Like, for example, a dairy farm, they can work for so many years, and they get so many of the offspring as the cows multiply. And so once they end up with a herd of cows, then they can go off and buy their own little farm and start farming. So there's a growing grazing nucleus of young farmers, which is exciting to see that. So it's optimistic. And in Wisconsin, there's a lot of grazing dairy farmers and beef farmers now. I think those are the ones that are holding their own more so than those that have gone to semi-confinement, the small farms. So we have to have a little bit of hope too.
Would anyone want to add anything else?
Well, I do want to, if I could, and we might be getting to this, and often I'm asked, what signs of optimism do you see out there? And I would echo those points that I think there are a tremendous number of young people in our community who are extremely sharp, they're innovative, they're very ambitious, they're hardworking, and they're ready for the opportunity. And I feel that if we can continue to cultivate that interest and provide some opportunities through policy, through research, through science, through all the things we're talking about today, I have not lost faith that innovation is going to happen in agriculture, and it's going to happen with the next generation. The next thing that I think gives me a lot of optimism is I think there's plenty of evidence to show that consumers want a deeper connection with their food, and they struggle to find ways to get it. And I think that if we can make those connections with consumers who want to be connected with their food, we are going to develop opportunities that move us ahead outside of the current paradigm that we often feel like we're stuck in.
Well, I'd like to just kind of expand on that new Homestead Act a little bit, in that, in my experience, it's been, I see that from living on a farm and being around, growing up as a kid, on the farm, that the farm kids pick up, a lot of it's learned. I mean, you can learn it from books, but it's not the same, because I'm pretty good at books, but I can't raise nothing. It's lucky Jim's a farmer, I'll tell you what. But there's this kind of innate knowledge that develops as those kids grow up and they want to come back to the farm. And like Jim, he just loves the dirt. He's not a big livestock guy, but boy, he's good at dirt, and I can see what he does with it, and it's amazing and impressive. But if kids never have, growing up, they've had to go to the city because their folks couldn't make the family farm go, and they don't have that opportunity to come back, they never get a chance to develop that innate knowledge of how to make things grow, and how to make livestock thrive, and how to be successful at things like that. And so it's important that we figure out a way to get young people back on the farm so that they can develop that knowledge, because if that doesn't happen, you and I suffer. I mean, the whole population suffers, because nobody knows how to grow food anymore. And the last thing I'd like to say is, I shared this with someone. We got that nice little bailout from Mr. Trump, at the beginning we got. And somebody made a smart comment about all the subsidies farmers get. And so I informed them that, yes, we did get a nice subsidy from Mr. Trump. We got 1 cent per bushel of corn. And I had 30,000 bushels in my bin, and that added up to $300, which would buy 1 bag of seed corn. So thank you very much, Mr. Trump. And that's what subsidies, as a rule, do for farmers. It's a drop in the bucket.
And I will add, if you buy enough of them $300 bags of seed corn, they give you a free hat. I don't wear them. I wear the corporate hats in the pig pen. The pigs don't know. Anyway, there is hope on the horizon.
They want to control your brain.
Yeah, there is hope on the horizon, and most of it has to do with politics. And if we get a Green New Deal, it's a whole new world in rural America again. There's opportunities. There's opportunities for everybody except industrial ag and the corporations and the big money. It's opportunities for the young families to farm. It can happen again. We can rebuild rural. It's awful hard to be positive, but This can be, it can happen, it might happen, it needs to happen.
Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so my next question, I don't know if you can answer or not. I love the idea that you're coming back to hope. That's really what I hope to be able to end today's session on, and that's what we really need is hope. My next question, though. A few days ago, I was on a phone call with civil society organizations from around the world. We were talking about hunger. And the woman from Pakistan came on and said, enough dialogue, we need action. So my question is, we've seen the students cutting school to demonstrate about climate change. Back in the 70s, we protested the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King, he had all of his nonviolent actions of demonstrations and sit-ins and marches, and he got things done. What do we do now? How do we organize farmers and consumers and let our politicians know what we need to do? Do you have ideas? What can we do when we leave here today to take action?
Well, it's important for people to understand how they're connected to farming, why food production is important. Our lives get so busy and we're running so many different directions, and the last thing you want to stop and think about is one more thing to do. But this might be that one thing that makes sure that all of us have something to eat in years to come. And part of that then is the understanding that we are really on the edge of a precipice in this deal. I don't really know if people don't come together and change the way that we look at farming and approach farming and food production, that there's going to be another generation. There'll be the corporate model, and that's what it's going to be. And I don't think any of us want Walmart telling us whether or not we're going to buy a pound of hamburger or whether or not we're going to buy a gallon of milk, because they're processing their own milk now, and down south they're processing their own beef to supply their stores, which sounds good on the outside, but you put that forward a little bit further and they're going to dictate who eats and who doesn't, and that's what it's coming to. So that's why it's so important for people to work together. As Bernie Sanders says, not me, but us. It has to be us, all of us. And we all have to realize how important we are to each other no matter what we do with our life. We have to support each other.
Yep, I totally agree. And politically, it's not about me, it needs to be about us. And by that I mean the family farmers, the consumers, the working class. We all need to be together on this. The people, the consumers, need to worry about what they eat and where it's coming from and how it's produced. The taxpayers need to worry about how their money is being spent. An example is agriculture, supporting these huge farms, these huge subsidies, and this profit insurance, crop insurance. That's what it's turned into. And people need to get engaged and come together and say, enough is enough. And when that happens, things start to change.
Yeah, we have to take a strong stand. We can't be too polite. Martin Luther King, we have a good image of him today, that he was a great leader, did all these great things, but he was hated by FBI, by Nixon. He was hated by the status quo. I was an anti-war protester, activist during the Vietnam War. They didn't like us. I probably have an FBI file somewhere. But you can't be popular. We're not going for popularity here. And that's why I look at our water quality as a good example I'd like to bring up. We talk about a little money here, a little money there. Our water quality is going downhill. It's not going uphill. They'll tell us it's getting better, but it's not. So we can't have this working around the fringes of the status quo. We got to take a strong stand. We got to have a complete change. And I'm with you. We have to, and that's why I think Bernie Sanders is saying the right things. We have to take that strong stand and go for it.
Yeah, the word needs to get out. Like I said earlier, Silence is no longer acceptable. We need to stand up and stand out and find political allies to do the same thing. For God's sake, on Facebook, I've seen the farmers in France. There's a lot of, most of them are small, mid-sized. They're closing down highways because they're not getting a price. Really? You've never seen anything like that in this country. Things need to start to happen.
They spread liquid manure on government buildings.
That's a shame, isn't it? Aaron?
Well, I know that we've had to endure a lot, and the political environment is really tough to endure. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, I keep this in mind sometimes after hearing a lot of discouraging or frustrating words. He said, "Some of the best things I have thought of during bad sermons." And haven't we been hearing a lot of bad sermons from what's been going on in our political system? But I do think that I agree with all activating and getting engaged is the absolute key. And I do have faith that that the devotion that I see in this room, that the dedication, the smarts, everything gives me a lot of hope. And on my bedroom wall, on our living room wall, we've got a poster that has the words of the old spiritual. You might know these words. And I always try to keep them in mind. But I'm going to read them because I'm on stage and I will forget if I don't. Okay. It always says, the spiritual lyrics go, "I don't feel no ways tired. I've come this far from where I started. Nobody told me that the road would be easy. I don't believe you brought me this far to leave me." And I believe that. I don't think we're this far just to be left here. I think we're moving forward.
Thank you. So how are we doing on time? We need to be out here at 5. Oh, okay. This is wonderful. What I like to say is a revolution can come quickly or slowly, but we need to be ready for it whenever it does get here. So I think this is an amazing event today. I hope we can use this video in this to help build up our movements. And I would really love to see conversations like this happening all over Iowa, all over the country, so people can understand more about what's going on. And so thank you all. Is there anyone else who needs to? Okay, Mike? Dave? All right. Group photo. I love that. Okay, thank you, everyone.